It was a moment no one saw coming. Princess Anne, the famously composed and duty-driven daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, finally broke her silence. In a rare and emotional interview, she spoke candidly about the truth behind her parents' marriage, revealing details that not only stunned royal watchers, but left King Charles visibly shaken. It wasn't a carefully rehearsed speech or some cryptic statement. It was honest, raw, and quietly devastating. Anne has always carried herself with quiet strength. She's been the steady one, the workhorse of the monarchy, often choosing duty over drama. So when she spoke, people listened. Her words cut deeper than any tabloid ever could, because they came from someone who lived it. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't sensationalize, but the weight of what she said was enough to send shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. The confession came as the royal family prepared for the upcoming anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's passing. Charles had asked Anne to take on a more prominent role during the commemorations, trusting her to honor their mother's legacy. But Anne had something else in mind. She wanted to honor both parents, truthfully, and that meant opening a door that had been shut for decades. She admitted there were parts of her parents' marriage that the public never saw. Moments that weren't captured in photos or highlighted in state documentaries. They had their piece, yes, but there was distance too. A lot of it. That single line held a story deeper than she could say aloud. Inside the palace, those who knew the truth stayed quiet. But once Anne spoke, the whispers turned into gasps. Charles, sitting just feet away, looked stunned. The man who had long idolized his parents' partnership was now forced to reckon with a more complex truth. And it was Anne, his sister, not a reporter, who delivered it. For decades, the royal narrative painted a perfect picture. A queen and her consort, united in public duty and personal strength. But Anne's words peeled back that image to reveal something more human. The cracks were there, and now they could no longer be ignored. The unrecorded years revealed. After Anne's revelation, the palace felt different. There was a shift, not loud, not chaotic, but real. The kind of shift that happens when someone finally tells a long-buried truth. She spoke of a time known by very few, a period she called the unrecorded years. Years when her parents, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, quietly drifted apart. These weren't the grand years of coronations or jubilees. They were quieter, private, not captured by royal photographers or covered in official speeches. During this period, Anne remembers feeling the change, not with words but with silences. Fewer shared dinners, separate calendars, subtle tension in the air. What shocked Charles and even Prince Andrew was how long this emotional distance lasted. It wasn't a brief moment. It was a season of their marriage, a time where responsibilities overwhelmed companionship, where love was sometimes replaced with protocol. And yet, none of it made the headlines. To the world, they were the perfect royal couple. Behind closed doors, things were more fragile. Anne recalled that during these years, her father seemed restless, her mother burdened. They functioned well as monarchs, but not always as partners. She never used the word estranged, but the message was clear. This wasn't the fairy tale the public imagined. And growing up in the midst of it, Anne learned to read between the lines. She knew when her father was away by choice. She could sense when her mother's silences meant more than a royal schedule. For years, she kept these memories to herself. Until now. What makes this so poignant is that the world never noticed. The Queen and Prince Philip were masters at upholding the image. But that image came at a cost. Anne's words reminded us all, even royals can live under the same roof and feel miles apart. Her confession didn't just humanize her parents, it redefined them. It reminded the public that duty can sometimes mask personal sacrifice. And as she spoke, it became clear. The deeper story of her parents' love was only just beginning to unfold. A peace that came and went. Despite the emotional distance Anne described, there were moments of calm, periods when Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip seemed perfectly aligned. Those years were marked by shared laughter, family holidays, and public smiles that reflected something genuine. But Anne, watching closely, knew that this peace wasn't always steady. It was something they had to work for, and sometimes something they lost again. Anne spoke of these cycles like someone recalling seasons. There were good years when her parents seemed close, almost carefree. Those were the times when her father would joke more, and her mother would laugh louder. They took pride in their family and shared their duties with a certain grace. From the outside, it looked like the royal dream was alive and well. But then, the frost would return. Anne explained that Philip, while deeply loyal, struggled with the constraints of royal life. He had been a naval officer, a leader, a man who thrived on decision-making and control. Transitioning into a life where he had to walk 2 steps behind his wife, literally and metaphorically, was difficult. It wasn't resentment, but a quiet frustration that built over time. Her mother, ever composed, didn't always show how the strain affected her, but Anne could see it. The Queen was a symbol of stability to the world, but she was a woman too. And marriage, even to someone like Prince Philip, required constant navigation. There were moments they drifted, moments they reconnected, but always under the watchful gaze of the world. Anne called it a rhythm of quiet survival, not a fairy tale, not a disaster, just 2 people trying to carry a country on their shoulders while holding on to each other. Sometimes they succeeded, sometimes they didn't. These recollections painted a bittersweet picture. Because behind every gala and every balcony wave was a couple weathering storms most never saw. It made their long marriage even more remarkable, not because it was perfect, but because they endured it all, together or apart. The Island Prince, Philip's survival story. Before he ever met Elizabeth, Prince Philip's life was shaped by exile, survival, and fierce independence. Born on the Greek island of Corfu in 1921, he didn't arrive into the world of luxury. In fact, his family fled Greece when he was still a baby, exiled in the middle of the night in an orange crate. That image alone tells you what kind of man he was destined to become: resilient, sharp, and hardened by reality. Philip's early years were a whirlwind of upheaval. He was educated in France, Germany, and later at Gordonstoun in Scotland, where discipline and duty were drilled into him daily. But it was at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth that everything changed. There, he met a young, wide-eyed Princess Elizabeth, who was immediately drawn to his confidence and charm. He was a cadet, tall, athletic, and already standing apart from the crowd. She was just 13, but something about him captivated her. As war broke out, Philip served with distinction in the Royal Navy. He was decorated for bravery, navigating dangerous waters and enemy fire. Yet, throughout the chaos of battle, he kept writing to Elizabeth. Those letters became the quiet bridge between 2 worlds: a princess bound by duty and a sailor shaped by fire. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was real. And for Elizabeth, "I didn't think about anybody else," she later admitted. By the time the war ended, their bond had solidified into something undeniable. Philip wasn't just a charming naval officer anymore. He was the man Elizabeth wanted beside her for life. But stepping into her world would come with sacrifice, pressure, and unimaginable change. Still, for a man who'd already survived exile, war, and public scrutiny, nothing about royal life scared him, except maybe losing himself in it. The fairy tale courtship. Their story wasn't just a love match. It was a royal legend in the making. It began with playful moments at Dartmouth, croquet matches, leapfrog on the lawn, quiet walks by the sea. The romance wasn't just noble, it was deeply personal. The young princess had fallen for a war hero, and he, in turn, was drawn to her quiet strength and fierce loyalty. As the war raged on, their love was kept alive through letters. Philip, always on the move with the Navy, would scribble updates from foreign ports. Elizabeth, waiting patiently at home, guarded his words like precious treasures. Theirs was a love forged in distance, tested by time, and it endured. In 1946, at Balmoral Castle, Philip finally proposed. There was no grandeur, just heartfelt honesty. He wanted her hand, and she gave her heart. But not everyone was thrilled. Some courtiers and family members questioned Philip's foreign roots, his brusque manner, and his lack of fortune. But Elizabeth stood firm. She told her father, King George VI, "He is the only man I could ever love." The couple made concessions for the crown. Philip gave up his Greek and Danish titles, became a British citizen, and took the name Mountbatten. These weren't small things, they were deep sacrifices, but he made them willingly. In exchange, the palace granted approval, and the path to royal matrimony was cleared. When they finally announced their engagement, the country celebrated with uncontainable joy. After years of war and uncertainty, this romance felt like hope. And for Elizabeth and Philip, it marked the beginning of something that would be both beautiful and endlessly complex. Marriage and the weight of duty. On a crisp November day in 1947, the nation stood still. Elizabeth and Philip were married at Westminster Abbey, in a ceremony broadcast across the globe. It was a fairy tale wedding for a war-weary world. But behind the flowers and royal pageantry, they were stepping into an entirely new life, one governed by duty, rank, and sacrifice. For a short while, they lived as a somewhat normal couple at Clarence House. Philip was still deeply involved in naval service, and Elizabeth relished those early years of domestic privacy. But everything shifted when her father, King George VI, died in 1952. Elizabeth ascended the throne. Suddenly, Philip was no longer just a husband. He was the Queen's consort, and nothing about that role was simple. For a man used to commanding ships, Philip now had to walk 2 steps behind. The palace staff didn't know what to call him, and the royal family name became a source of real contention. Philip wanted his children to carry the Mountbatten name, but the government, and even the Queen's own advisors, pushed back. The compromise, Mountbatten-Windsor, was reached, but not without strain. "I am nothing but a bloody amoeba," Philip once said, the only man in the country not allowed to give his name to his own children. The transformation from naval officer to ceremonial figure didn't sit well with him at first. There was a loss of identity and an ongoing adjustment to the rigid structures of royal life. For Elizabeth, too, the role of sovereign became all-consuming. Their marriage was tested not by infidelity or scandal in those years, but by silence, structure, and separate paths that slowly drifted apart. Still, they kept their bond intact through shared moments: horse riding, painting, long walks in Balmoral. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was in these quiet moments that they reminded each other why they'd chosen this life together, even as the crown reshaped everything around them. Growing strains behind palace doors. As the years passed, the image of royal unity began to crack beneath the surface. The strain of monarchy was no longer just emotional. It was becoming visible. Philip's frustration started to show, and the world began noticing. One moment that raised eyebrows occurred in Australia when Philip reportedly threw a tennis racket during a royal tour. The palace never confirmed it, but whispers of tension began swirling. And then came his famous quip about being a bloody amoeba, a line that echoed the private pain of being overshadowed by duty. Debates over the family name continued to echo through the halls of Buckingham Palace. Elizabeth stood firm, but Philip resented how little say he had in the direction of their life. The weight of tradition often suffocated his individuality. At public events, his sharp wit and occasional blunt remarks made headlines. Some found him funny. Others thought he was reckless. Behind closed doors, Anne witnessed the strain firsthand. She remembered the cold dinners, the disagreements masked behind polite smiles, the times when her father would disappear into silence. Her mother, always composed, rarely confronted him, preferring calm rebukes to open arguments. But that didn't mean things were fine. The palace, polished and perfect from the outside, was full of small battles that chipped away at intimacy. Still, they endured. Not because the problems vanished, but because they had an unspoken agreement. The crown came first. They would remain united for the good of the nation, even when their hearts felt distant. That loyalty, however noble, often came at the expense of emotional closeness. For Anne, these memories became the framework for her confession. The silence between her parents was not out of hatred, but out of duty and exhaustion. It wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about who could endure the longest under the pressure of 1,000 years of tradition. Affair rumors and silent judgments. As the royal couple moved further into the spotlight, rumors began to swirl, loud enough to reach the palace gates, but never officially confirmed. Whispers linked Prince Philip to several women: actress Pat Kirkwood, ballet star Galina Ulanova, and even his close confidant, Lady Brabourne. The media painted a picture of scandal. The palace stayed quiet. Philip was never one to address gossip, but when the rumors reached a boiling point, he fired back with a classic line. "Good God, woman, have you ever stopped to think that I can't go anywhere without a detective?" It was both a denial and a warning. He knew the press loved to twist shadows into stories, yet for Anne, these stories weren't just headlines. They were part of the quiet pain that followed their family. Whether true or not, the rumors deepened the emotional distance. She recalled the way her mother would shut down whenever a newspaper hinted at scandal. Elizabeth would never discuss it, but the tension in her face, the pause in her voice, it said enough. To the outside world, they were still the strong royal couple. But inside, the weight of unspoken truths began to pile up. The Queen was calm but tired. Philip was loyal but restless. And their children, caught in the middle. For Anne, the hardest part wasn't the gossip itself. It was how it poisoned the air without ever being acknowledged. As she revealed in her confession, "We learned to live with whispers, not answers." That single sentence summed up decades of silent judgment and emotional armor. Late life peace at Wood Farm. By 2017, something changed. After decades of service, Prince Philip announced he was stepping back from public life. It wasn't scandal, it wasn't illness, it was choice. At age 96, he said he wanted peace, and he found it at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate. There, away from the grandeur of Buckingham Palace, he spent his days painting, reading, and carriage driving, a hobby he adored. The Queen remained in London for official duties, but they spoke every day. "I wanted a slower pace of life," he told Anne once, and she understood. He wasn't abandoning the crown, he was just choosing calm after decades of chaos. At Wood Farm, Philip found something rare: solitude and self. He entertained close friends, hosted grandchildren, and reflected on a life spent in duty's shadow. It wasn't lonely, it was intentional. This was the prince as he truly was, a man with sharp humor, strong opinions, and a desire to be more than a consort. Anne often visited and treasured those quiet afternoons. They talked, not about duty, but about family, memories, and peace. For her, it was the father she had longed to know, not the royal figure, but the man behind the title. His choice to live separately wasn't a rejection of the Queen, it was a declaration of balance. After giving everything to the nation, he kept something for himself. And for the first time in years, Anne saw her parents not as monarchs, but as two aging souls, deeply connected, yet finally free to live on their terms. A life's end with respect and reflection. Prince Philip's final chapter was one of quiet dignity. After decades of service, he officially retired in 2017, stepping away from the spotlight he had long occupied beside Queen Elizabeth II. But this wasn't withdrawal, it was a conscious shift toward peace. He settled at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, a modest retreat compared to palace life, where he enjoyed simple routines like carriage driving, painting, and writing. Though physically apart, the Queen and Philip remained emotionally close. They spoke every day, and his steady presence continued to support her. During the pandemic lockdown, they reunited at Windsor Castle in what was called the HMS Bubble, a full-circle moment of intimacy for a couple forged in wartime. Their love, though tested by time and circumstance, endured to the very end. Anne later revealed how her father's final years mirrored the man he truly was: resilient, self-aware, and deeply private. His passing wasn't just the loss of a consort, it marked the end of an era. For Charles, witnessing this quiet conclusion added a layer of grief and reflection. The monarchy lost a figure of strength, and Charles lost the one man whose shadow he could never quite escape. Anne's confession: truth over tradition. After decades of silence, Princess Anne stepped into the spotlight not for duty, but for truth. It was a rare, deeply personal interview. No royal script, no rehearsed lines, just a daughter speaking about her parents, their love, their flaws, their burdens. Anne didn't intend to shake the monarchy, but her words carried power. She began by acknowledging the legacy of her mother, a symbol of strength, she said. But then came the shift, the moment she looked straight into the camera and said what no royal had dared to say before. They weren't perfect. They struggled. The confession stunned many, but especially King Charles, who had always held a romanticized view of their parents' marriage. Anne described a home of formality more than warmth, of distance more than intimacy. It wasn't bitter. It was honest. "We saw the silence. We felt it," she admitted. It was a childhood marked not by chaos, but by a tension that was never named out loud. She spoke of her father with a mix of admiration and empathy. He was strong, capable, and loyal, but also restless, often torn between royal duty and personal fulfillment. Her mother, the Queen, was unwavering in her commitment, but sometimes so bound by protocol that she forgot to live outside of it. The impact of Anne's words went beyond Buckingham Palace. Across the country, viewers were moved by her bravery. For the first time, the curtain had been pulled back, not by scandal, but by sincerity. She wasn't there to destroy a myth. She was there to humanize it. And in doing so, she gave the monarchy something it desperately needed: a dose of vulnerability. Anne reminded the world that behind the crown were people, flawed, hurting, but still holding on to love in the only way they knew how. Her confession was a gift, not a wound, and it reframed an entire era of royal history through the eyes of someone who lived it. Charles's devastated response. The moment Charles heard Anne's words, everything changed. He didn't just hear a sister's truth, he heard a son's heartbreak. For a man raised to revere his parents as pillars of strength, the revelation hit like a wave. Inside Clarence's house, aides say Charles was unusually quiet. He watched the interview twice. Then he sat in silence for hours. It wasn't anger, it was grief. The weight of legacy and emotion pressed against him all at once. For years, Charles had spoken of his parents with pride. He admired his mother's devotion to duty, and he often defended his father's gruff nature as misunderstood. But Anne's confession peeled back layers that even he had not dared to explore. She had lived the same childhood, but had seen it differently. Her words forced him to revisit memories he had long compartmentalized. Was it really that distant? He asked a close friend, according to royal sources. And that question lingered with him. Not just about his parents, but about his own role as a father, as a husband, as a king. As the first anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's death approached, Charles found himself emotionally unmoored. He had planned a traditional tribute, something formal and stately. But now he felt compelled to do more, to honor the emotional truth, not just the ceremonial one. Publicly, Charles made no statements, but behind closed doors, he reportedly reached out to Anne. They spoke long into the night, sharing memories, regrets, and for the first time in years, tears. It was not a confrontation. It was a reconciliation. Siblings united not just by duty, but by truth. What does this mean for the monarchy? For Charles, it's a turning point. He now carries the crown, but also the burden of knowing how deeply silence can shape a family. And as king, he seems determined not to repeat that mistake.